On the way home from our recent road trip to see air museums, we came across the HARS hangars at Parkes. This wasn't on our itinerary, but it should have been. We were very glad that the team here at HARS were more than willing to show us around. A big thanks to Mike Delahunty, who certainly gave us a detailed tour of the museum.
My name is Mike Delahunty, and I'm the project leader here at HARS Parkes Aviation Museum. The hangar room at the moment was first erected in 1940 and was occupied by the Air Force until 1946 when they left, and it became a migrant camp until the mid-50s. And the hangars were occupied by various people up until the time when the Federal Airports Corporation divested themselves of the airports around Australia, and it was gifted to Parkes Shire Council, who's operated ever since. During the Vietnam War, 1966, they had the need for hangars over in Vietnam, and 2 hangars went from Parkes to Vung Tau for caribou servicing, and then also to Cam Bay for 2 squadron Canberras for their servicing. And where the rest of them have gone, I don't know, but there's 2 have gone to Vietnam. And I was told the one at Vung Tau was still there in 2006, and it had Wallaby Airlines on the outside of it. And but I spoke to someone who was there in 2012, and they said the hangar had gone at that stage. And this one, the same age, in this benign climate here in Parkes, it survived very well. Whereas the one that went to Vung Tau, very close to the ocean, and it would have rusted out by now. But this one is in pretty good shape, apart from the constant wind battering that it's had over the last 70 odd years. So we've been gradually building up our collection here at Parkes. This was our storage facility, and then we decided that we would turn it into a static museum of aircraft we can't display at our main base at Shell Harbour. So we moved into this hangar, and we moved all the stuff out of here and made space for the aircraft. And since then we've been gradually adding to our collection, and the collecting is stepping up because we want to acquire as much as we can to preserve for Australians into the future. And whereas our mandate is to restore them to a static display, our main base restores them to a flying stage. But these aircraft here in Parkes won't fly again, but they can be made to look as a worthwhile static display for people in the future. So we have a lot of people returning here whose parents, mothers and fathers served in the RAF during the war, and they're based here at Parkes. And we're getting quite a lot of information back from various people about what the base was like and so forth. And so we're preserving that bit of history, and we'll do so, more so when we get to our new site, which is going to be a purpose-built building to put all the aircraft outside under cover. And so we want to duplicate what we have at Shell Harbour up here in Parkes, and we're gradually moving towards that. This is the engines that power some of our aircraft, and they range from de Havilland Goblins in the Vampire through to Super Constellation engines, to the Neptune jet engine, and the Avon jet engine, which was in the Canberra Bomber and the Sabre, and a Rolls-Royce Dart that was in the Fokker Friendships, and then a Neptune engine over on the far side. And this one is the crowning glory. It's the RB211 from a 747-300. So it's quite a contrast to this one that flies to London in less than 24 hours, and the Constellation engine over here that it would take 4 days to go to London. So that's the advance in aviation from virtually the 40s to the 80s, and we've made huge steps. So we have the Wessex helicopter, The Wessex was based on the HMAS Sydney, other ships of the fleet, and it was used for anti-submarine, for search and rescue, and it saw service in Vietnam. Had a pretty good track record. We lost a few of them, but basically a pretty reliable sort of, and it quite surprises people how big it is and how big the rotor blades are. We've been fortunate here to be able to deploy the rotor blades and have it on display that way. And the gentle breeze here, you can see it's starting to rock the blades. It was in a fair flutter yesterday with the winds we had through here yesterday. So that's the engines. People take a lot of interest in the engines and what they represent. Here are some of the models and a bit of memorabilia from the base in the early stages, but these are models of the aircraft that we have outside and other models that have been donated to us over a period of time. So that's important, and it's also part and parcel of the historical nature of this as a wartime training base. This is some photographs of the aircraft that were based in Parkes during the war. They're Kitty Hawks, Beaufighters, Boomerangs, Faulty Vengeance, Beauforts, Spitfires, and Anson Ferry Battles and so forth. The most famous graduate from Parkes, the training base, was Gough Whitlam. He did his navigation training here and went from here up to the Port Macquarie and operated anti-submarine patrols off the northern coast, and then he went up into the islands and did his service up there. But there's some photographs here of the base. In 1945 there were 60 odd Spitfires here, as it was an operational conversion training unit from the trainers into the faster aircraft. And over time we've collected a bit of memorabilia from people who have been here, uniforms and training notes and trench art and so forth. It's all been there. So, and on the civilian side, we have this Cessna 150, and this was one of the most popular training aircraft in the world. 24,000 built, 4,000 under licence in France, and this particular aircraft was owned and flown by the first female Indigenous pilot in Australia. And Virginia learned to fly, bought the aircraft off her flying instructor, and her and her husband had two properties, and they used to produce mohair rabbits. And they'd be able to fly from one property to the other in 20 minutes, half an hour, instead of a road trip of 3 hours. They'd put two sheepdogs in the back of this 150, fly out to the property. The dogs used to love the flying, and in fact with Virginia when flying without the dogs, her husband had to hold the dogs because they chased the aircraft down the runway. So it's got a lot of history, and a lot of people walk in here and say they learnt to fly in one of those. So, and over the back here, this quite a surprise for most people to see this Huey Cobra helicopter gunship. This one is a Gulf War veteran, served in the Gulf War. Australia never had these, but we had gunship support in Vietnam and also in Afghanistan. So there's a few Australians alive today because we had gunship support. So it's fairly important that it's here in the museum in Parkes. Courtesy of the Air Force, they had a engine failure and a forced landing, and we bought the aircraft off them, and it's providing parts to get other ones in the air. But in the meantime, it shows how an aircraft is put together. Dual controls, you can fly from the front or the back. This was a Harvard. Once again, Australia never had Harvards. This one was an ex-New Zealand Air Force, but the Americans had them, the Brits had them, the Rhodesians, South Africans had them, and after the war it equipped air forces in Europe to get them back into the air again, and In fact, 140 of them went to the Spanish Air Force.
Okay.
Just in 1947. They took a aircraft carrier around, flew them off in the Bay of Biscay into Spain, and because America felt they could do business with Franco because he stayed neutral right through. And we have some that were part of that Spanish Air Force. But it's good display because it shows what the aircraft looks like underneath. It'll eventually go back in the air, but it's a long-term restoration project. This is mainly our workshop out here, but it's available for our visitors to come through. And what we have here is it's a Lockheed Electra Junior 12A, and it was built for Pittsburgh Steel in the US in 1939. It was seconded into the US Army Air Corps in 1942 when the war started for the Americans, and then it went to the RAF as part of Lend-Lease, and while there it was used for communications and transport around the UK. At the end of the war it was bought by an Australian company, and then subsequently then sold to Skyways, which used it to transfer replacement pilots in the Berlin Airlift.
Oh.
So this is a Berlin Airlift Survivor. It would fly from Duxfold in the UK to Tempelhof in Berlin with replacement pilots whose time expired. And so it's got a lot of history. It was then bought by the Zinc Corporation, and it came to Australia, and it was part of Silver City Airways. And so it flew with Zinc Corporation for a while, and then it was sold to the Bush Church Aid Society, and then it had a undercarriage collapse on landing, and so it's been in a warehouse ever since. So it's in pretty good shape. Still got the original wheels and tyres that it had, and whereas most Lockheed 12s that are still flying have Neptune nose wheels or Lockheed Super Constellation nose wheels, because they're no longer available and can't be serviced. Behind the Lockheed is a Macchi two-seat jet trainer. We acquired that one recently, and it will be repainted shortly, but we're got it inside preserved, and it won't fly again, but it's complete and a good display.
So that's come from the Air Force, has it?
From the Air Force,
Yep.
yes. It was being used in Adelaide at the Defence Science Technology Organisation doing electromagnetic trials, and they'd finished with it. The Air Force didn't want it, so they offered it to us, and we travelled to Adelaide, pulled it apart and trucked it back to Parkes and reassembled it. The Air Force has just gifted us this part Bell 47 Sioux helicopter, which was in the MASH movie. It's well known as the MASH movie, but they're used in Vietnam for a communications aircraft, and they were quite a good transport. The distinctive bubble we haven't got. We're trying to acquire that at the moment to complete it, but it's preserved here, and we've got the blades for it. We'll put the blades on it soon. We've got to put some wheels on it so we can move it around, and we've got one of the our members who's fixing the floor down. Yeah, so it's all happening. So outside.
You've got quite a yard out here, haven't you?
Yes, it's this DC-3 or C-47A. It came to Australia with the United States Army Air Corps in 1944, followed the American advance up to as far as Korea, and then it was declared surplus in 1946. And it was bought by the Department of Civil Aviation who brought it back to Australia and flew it round testing all the landing aids at the regional airports. And then it vacated that and it became a freighter, and with Brain and Brown, and it flew out of Essendon in Victoria and went all over the place carrying freight. In 1979 it ceased flying, and then it went to various museums, practically all the museums on the East Coast, as far up as Cairns, Townsville and Caboolture. We acquired it from Caboolture and brought it down here and reassembled it, and the wings are over here being painted before going onto the aircraft, and engines are in. We've got the props up here shortly, so that's moving along. The Convair across here, it's a 580, originally a 340 converted to turbo prop, and that one is heading up to back to Shell Harbour as a flying aircraft. And we're normally into restoration, not destruction, as can be seen here. But this is obviously it's a time expired engine, and it is providing parts for us to put the engines into this tracker. So there's this one has engine rings in it, but no engine mounts. We're cutting access to get the engine mounts out.
Right.
So very shortly we'll sling the engine and then separate it from the engine ring. We'll mount the engine mounts into here, and then we'll put those engines on. And these engines will turn, but I don't think we'll have the time to get this to a running stage, but right. We'll get it to looking like it could fly. It's pretty incomplete, and it hasn't flown. There was a great hangar fire back in 1976 when they burnt all the trackers. Well, this one survived that because it was away at the time, but it got caught up in the Nowra bushfires 3 years ago.
So fire still got it.
Fire still got it, yeah. And it burnt out the bubble windows and scorched the underside. We've had to rub all that back and paint it, and we're searching the world now for parts to complete it. New perspex, new old perspex, and the engines will go on, props will go on. We've got to find the wings for it as well. And
you don't have the wings?
The wings, and we just put the tail on recently and the rudder on, and one side's painted, the other side's not. We wanted to get it back to being as complete as we can, as quick as we can. So, but it's got history. 842 had a good service history. It's got it's credited with catching many Phantom submarines and so forth in its time. So, but we are acquiring all the internals of the aircraft to make it more complete inside. So that's what we're working on there. And the Convair moving out. We have these anti-aircraft guns here, which came from the Air Force. We're rubbing them all back. They're about to be painted when we get some decent weather here. Yep. And so we normally would be preserving aircraft, not shooting them down, but it's a whole part and parcel.
Important part of the history, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, we fly the flag here, and they'll become part of our memorial garden out the front when it's all complete.
Yeah, fantastic.
Well, that's what we've got here, and now we've got the aircraft outside. Absolutely. So we can go through there. Yeah, the engine mounts. And those two, they join together, yep. And the main bolt goes through and holds the whole thing onto the engine ring, and that just holds that goes through to the engine itself, that goes through to the engine ring. So without these, we can't fit the engines to the rings out there, so that's why we need to get those. We have plans to cover all these aircraft up at our new site, and we've had We repainted this one, we recovered this one. It was involved with 2 cyclones up in Townsville. And the cyclones went through and damaged it. There was no perspex, there's no nose to it, no rudder, no stinger tail. But we had parts from operating Neptunes for 25 years now. So we went to America, got more parts, and now it's pretty complete. It was all rubbed back and spray painted. It's been touched up since that time. But the ultraviolet up here is pretty savage. We got pretty severe conditions up here. The Caribou, it's very much in need of a coat of paint. When the Air Force didn't use primer on it, so the paint's peeling off. So we're not going to worry too much about it until it gets under cover. But these are the great workhorse from Vietnam, and they had incredible short field takeoff and landing because of these huge flaps that they got here, and the exhaust coming over the top of the wing was a exhaust augmented lift from the shape of the flaps, and great big tail for stability, and a cutaway here so it could really rotate and get out of tight spots. The Jindovic, that was designed and built in Australia. It was a target towing drone, and it joined Anglo Australian production. We sold them to the US Navy, to the Indians, the Swedish Navy, and other countries around the world. And with wing attachments, wing extensions, they could go to 55,000 feet. But this one was a very early one. It crashed in about 1954, and it was up on a pole down at the Navy base for many years, and it was gifted to us. And we were given a whole lot of spare parts, but they were for later marks, and nothing fitted. So we've had to fabricate a few bits like leading edges and so forth. But it's not very complete, but it's better to have a less than perfect example than no example at all. And this Iskra, this was Polish, at Warsaw Pact countries designed and built it, but the Poles were the only ones who really took it up. Others went to India and places like that as part of their support. But there was a few flying in Australia, but this one's had its flying time. The engine can't be overhauled or replaced, so it's here in the museum. Quite a pretty little jet, really. There's been a few flying around the place, and they're a neat bit of gear. We were able to get some of the rocket pods and so forth for it, but there's a few bits and pieces missing, and I've got no idea where to get them from. Yeah,
was the cockpit complete?
Complete, yes, yeah. Cockpit's very complete. So it'll be a trip to Poland to get some parts for that.
Oh, that'll be exciting.
Yes. Yes, HARS has taken me around the world, not to Poland though. And this P3, this one flew in here about 3 or 4 years ago. It's been on display ever since. And it is actually a spares aircraft to keep our flying P3 in the air. So from time to time the guys come up here and take bits off this and to keep that one flying. So, but it's rather unique that it's got all that equipment inside it, which was top secret until it came out of service. There's still a couple with the Air Force, and while they transition into the new airframe that does the maritime surveillance. But the Orion took the place of the Neptune, and the black one down here is probably fairly unique. That it was built in 1951, so most of them are now beer cans in America that built at that stage. This one's still intact, and it's quite a historical aircraft because of what it did in the early stages. And we've actually had visitors coming here from Queensland, from Western Australia, to see it because they've had relatives who've operated them back in the 50s and 60s. But this was the sub Hunter that followed on from Neptune's, and this particular aircraft did 60 hours in total, looking for the MH370 in the Indian Ocean.
Oh, right, yeah.
It found the missing French sailor woman back in the 90s, Isabelle Ortissier, and it tracked Russian subs off Singapore, and we almost lost it in Afghanistan. And the Commonwealth Public Servant that handed the aircraft over to us said that we were lucky to get this because the War Memorial wanted this one.
Oh, right.
So it's here now, and people can actually come on board and sit in the seats and see what it was all about. But they were, the Orion was a derivative of the Electra airliner, and it's slightly smaller, shorter, and same wings and same larger engines and fuel capacity and so forth. So it's been the guys that flew these and maintained them have a very high regard for them, and as we do too. So the sonar buoys were all kept in this containers here, right. And the operators sitting here at the consoles would have an identical panel where they sit. They'd punch in here, they want number 4 sonar buoy, number 2 tube, a couple of bags of charge to go in there as well. Then it'd be standby. And then when the operator is ready, he would launch from there, and then it would shoot out and through those tubes. So the operators would then want to leave those closed for as long as possible to dissipate the smoke. Yep. But you can smell it in here. There's a cordite smell that's permeated right through the aircraft, but they'd keep them closed for as long as they could because the charge that goes out. But there's also a free fall chute there that if they were dropping something out to drop a message to a life raft or what it might be, they'd put that brown tube inside that would then take the outside edge away from the boundary layer of the aircraft, so it would then it wouldn't be obstructed by departing the shaft down, and then and it also doubled as a vacuum cleaner with a Venturi effect to the vacuum 60-footer vacuum cleaner hose back there, and you can vacuum the whole aircraft before you land.
That's so good.
So this is the consoles. Various areas operations that would take place, electronics, eavesdropping, there'd be picking up sonar buoy signals and other navigation and so forth. This is the keyboard, and that's the mouse, and that would the operator be there doing that. They'd all be in communication with each other and through the intercom system, and they'd be conducting operations and carrying out surveillance and doing what they've got to do. So all this was pretty well top secret, and even dependents couldn't go on board the aircraft when they were at their base in Adelaide. And when we took our flying P3 to Adelaide, there was a queue a mile long all day of people trying to get on board the aircraft to have a look at it, because they'd watched them fly over Adelaide since 1965, and but they never get on board because of the secrecy of it. So we're rather chuffed to have one up here in Parkes, and certainly very chuffed to have one flying as well. So it was a cocoon, no windows, and all the operation was in here. There's power units inside here which could power up a small city to provide all the electricity needed to power up all these sets. So this became the sensor manager's position here. The sensor manager here would supervise what all these people here were doing, and then and further forward is the tactical coordinator, who is virtually the plane captain, looking after the mission and directing what these people should do down here. So the tactical coordinator would then signal through to the navigator who sat on this side. Then the navigator would work out a course and advise the captain, the plane captain, to fly that course. The aircraft captain would fly the course. Flight engineer sat in between the two pilots, and once they're in position, those seats go forward, and then the engineer's got access to all those overhead panels through there. Generally, every time the Air Force went flying, there was a number of people on board the aircraft under training. So while it had 2 pilots and 2 flight engineers and all these operators through here, there was generally more people on board because it was continual training. 1951 this one was built, so shortly after the war, and these dark colours.
Yeah.
These dark colours were all the go, because when this one came to Australia in 51, it had nose turrets, had a dorsal turret and a tail turret, and it wasn't until they changed the role of the aircraft to being a maritime reconnaissance that the guns came off. Right. And the plastic nose went on, and the Stinger tail. There's the P3 has one as well, yep. And the Tracker has one which you wind out, yep. And that's a magnetic anomaly detector, yep. And it picks up submarines under the surface. Yeah. 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 And so it had all that equipment added to it, and a suite of instrumentation put in, and then in 1962 we bought 12 more, which was a PWV-7 over here, which is about 4 foot longer than what this one is. A radome in here, this could pick up a sub on the surface from 20 miles away. We haven't repaired that yet. Yeah. The PWV-7's a little bit longer, and that had the same damage to it because they get full of water, they roll over and they crush the fiberglass. Oh, yeah, yeah. And it's been sitting around the place. This was a training aid at Wagga, and so the guys were training on it. So the flight sergeant would come along with a hammer and go bang, 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 fix that. And they'd have to repair it all. And there's some of those that are on ribs that had to repair the rib as well. Okay. But when we first acquired it, it had written on the inside of it, Dolly by Smithy and Gun by Jonesy. And so that was, they were judged on that. We didn't think that was, it wasn't like Rosie Riveter signing the aircraft in World War II, so we didn't preserve it, we painted over it on the inside.
Thank you, Mike Delahunty, and everyone at the HARS Museum in Parkes, New South Wales, for being so generous with your time and knowledge of your aircraft. This was the end of our road trip for 2023, and if you enjoyed this tour, please check out our other museum visits. You'll find a playlist specifically for museums in the description. Thanks so much for your support by subscribing to this channel and sharing it with your friends.